Welcome to another video. I found yesterday's Akua show particularly annoying, actually. You see, I tried to improve things I asked for a 60-second video I could put on, so I could put a sort of picture of things so you could then discuss. But I was limited to 32 seconds and I had to fit everything in that. So you'll see my attempt at that. But I just found Jim Dale particularly bad this week. And I'm realising that we're getting nowhere doing it this way. Again, I travelled 600 miles to get a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes in on my side, if that. So I've really got to try and break out of this. But there are things that happened yesterday that I'm particularly angry with, and I've had to take some actions on in the background, as it were. You'll see. So anyway, here it is. Now, I'm not going to play the whole thing through and then repeat with a dissection. I'm just going to dissect immediately to keep the video as short as possible. So, enjoy.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Akua and now it's time for Climate Control, where we discuss the debate around the climate. And we discuss COP28, another COP, 27, 28, they're going on and on. They're just, has it been a success? Has it been a failure? The President failed to commit to the phasing out of fossil fuels. That's the President of COP28. I think it was Al Jaber. He's the guy. Oh, no, that was the other one. But honestly, towards the end of this year's climate change conference, countries agreed to call on others to stop using the polluting energy source, the fossil fuels, but without anything in place to hold them to account, which is just like the last time, really, where they came up with, what was it, giving money away to poorer nations who have been affected by the climate, but they forgot to mention about CO2 reduction. Well, listen, I'm joined now by Jim Dale, meteorologist and social commentator, and also Paul Burgess, climate scientist. I'm going to start with you, Jim Dale, because you're dressed as a snowflake. He's just a snowflake. He is a snowflake.
I am. There you go. I'm halfway there to Christmas.
Yeah, well, you know, go on.
And there might be some snow around. I can say that now openly.
You could say, well, that's a bit vague, isn't it? There might be, there might not be.
9 days away.
All right, well, go on, carry on. So go on.
COP28 was a kind of a line in the sand of Dubai, if I can phrase it like that. One small step for man, but not a giant leap for mankind.
Can you speak in
well, what that means is a lot of talk, a lot of smudging the word, as you've mentioned, the transition now rather than the phasing out. So, how can I put this? What's going to happen in the next year or two? Probably not a lot. Nothing will change as far as catastrophic type weather events are concerned. So, look, it never was going to be that. Each one of these is a movement forward, but it's, as I say, it's a small movement forward. And I think that's where we are, and we look forward to COP29 and see whether we can inch forward again.
Supports Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, wants to stop oil, wants to stop all fossil fuels as soon as possible. The clothes he's sitting in there wouldn't be possible without oil. The chair he's sitting on wouldn't be, nor the desk in front of him, nor for that matter the camera or his phone, nor for that matter the television you'll be watching this on or the screen you'll be watching this on. So, you know, these things, nor would your car, and the asphalt on the road that's needed to actually surface the road for him to get here to the studio, as it were, that wouldn't be there either. This sheik was really correct when he said stopping it would be going back to caveman days, and it would destroy all modern life. But they want to do that because they want to build a new, very left-wing order in the world. That's what this is really about. But, you know, COP28 has achieved nothing. And the idea of a small step, what small step? There's no small steps there. It's a meaningless... The only thing it did good was it added a little bit of CO2 to the world. Anyway, I'll let this carry on.
Paul?
COP28 was a success in as much as it failed, as they all do, right? So it's a success in that way. And it's actually trying to solve a problem, just as Jim has mentioned, catastrophes and so on, that doesn't exist. And so could I bring up my first slide to explain
this? Go on then, quickly. What's on the first slide?
What's on the first slide is what I showed last week, which is the IPCC. It should be coming up, I hope.
Don't worry, you carry on talking.
Well, it's the IPCC, when nothing's emerged in the historic records for floods, droughts, etc. So what I'd like, there it is there. And this is what Jim really reacted to last week, and I'm sure he's going to respond this week. So what I've got now is a little 32-second video to explain why the whole thing is false. Now, I've just taken droughts. Now, don't forget, we're looking at history up to now.
Okay.
I don't want to discuss the future because I don't accept all the models.
When the producer asks me next week to come onto the programme and gives us a subject,
all right.
we will do this. I'll bring you information from NASA, from NOAA.
No, you have to refute. You have to refute what I've just claimed from IPCC. You have to say, Paul, you've already said it. You said I've cherry-picked it and distorted it. Right, you have to prove that because I am quoting the reference. All the viewers can see the reference on it and they can check.
Anybody can go and look at this guy, Gregory.
Yeah, that's right. They can.
Okay,
and tell me a study. Tell me any study that shows droughts increasing. There aren't.
Well, listen. Okay. Well, that's a challenge for Jim Dale.
One more.
I can do that quite happily.
Next week, he will bring in something that says that droughts are increasing, even though the reports from the IPCC appear to say that they're not.
That's not
Jim
the IPCC.
Dale, well, no, that's the page before.
That's
the page before.
Gregory Whitestone, who nobody's ever heard of.
No. This is all on the page before as well.
So we're looking at the history up to now, and if we play the video now, we'll look at it.
All right, let's take a look. Let's get that video up. This is Paul Burgess explaining for you.
As anyone can see from this table, UK droughts have reduced over the years. The worst droughts were by far in the past. The UK Environment Agency agrees, with recent drought events being no means exceptional, as does the UK Met Office. Currently, there are no UK climate attribution studies available that clearly link human-induced climate change with altered risk of drought events. And of course, NASA itself. The USA Environment Agency, EPA, agrees, along with studies on a global scale. Well, that was how it was presented on air, but I'll just go through it slowly so you understand. This first slide simply details the worst droughts in UK history in order of duration, and you can see the worst were, well, it was far worse in the past by a massive scale. And again, this is backed up by the UK Environment Agency, who stated in their drought report, with recent drought events by no means exceptional, as they aren't. They could have gone further and said they were reducing, but that's as much as you can expect politically these days. Now, this report is from the UK Met Office on their report with UK and global extreme events drought. Current report. Currently, there are no UK climate attribution studies available that clearly link human-induced climate change with an altered risk of drought events. That's their polite way of saying they can't find anything, which is exactly what the IPCC are saying, of course, and that relies not just to the UK, but their studies globally, and it's current. All you have to do is put a few words of that sentence into Google and you'll find the report. It's live on their website now. Following on from that one, of course, we have NASA itself. The report here in 2017. Just they issued a report to say the droughts have disappeared, from the USA. Well, from much of the USA. Again, reporting less droughts. Right, this one is from the EPA, which is the Environment Agency in the USA. And the diagram, when it's in the blue upper part, is showing a wet period. When it's in the brown drier part, if you like, it's showing the drought periods. And there we are. There's the record. And what did they say? Well, they say the 1930s and 1950s saw the most widespread droughts. Not today, way back in history, just like in the UK, just like globally, just like everywhere. But, the alarmists spin a totally different story. The science doesn't show it. So we've got both environment agencies, each side of the Atlantic, basically agreeing. So for this last study, I chose a global one, the Global Drought Monitor. And there it is, at the very period we're in now, as very, very low indeed, nowhere near as high in the past. Yet Jim Dale is claiming the exact opposite. Recent decades are catastrophes in droughts. So why is it I chose droughts? Well, that's because it came up last week, and I conclusively show here that we haven't got the claimed catastrophes that Jim Dale claims going on in droughts. If anything, the exact opposite. But the same arguments, the same detail I can do, showing the alarmist's own data for storms, for forest fires, for sea levels, and so on. The entire claims of catastrophes of extreme climates are wrong. It even includes heat waves. So I can do the same analysis using the alarmist data to expose them. Because what they do is they don't look at the science. The science doesn't matter anymore. The lie has to get bigger and bigger and bigger to maintain their agenda. And that is what I'm trying to expose.
Beat that, Jim.
OK, so I'll beat it. All right, first of all, Paul, you're not a climate scientist. You're a water resource engineer and not a climate scientist. So what you're pulling up is something that you pulled up last week from Gregory Wrightstone that nobody'd ever heard of ever. I looked to find out who this guy was, and he's been banned on LinkedIn for putting out misinformation and lies. So that's a flag in the soil, if you like, as far as he's concerned.
I consider that remark to be slanderous, actually, because he now has to show that this gentleman, who, by the way, is an absolute expert on the subject, even accepted as an IPCC reviewer, and he's the head of the CO2 Coalition. He's a pretty famous guy, actually. And he's just said he has spread lies. So let's actually look at the true story here. And here is a video explaining by the gentleman himself what happened.
Consideration. And recently we've been seeing this a very dangerous path where voices who are not aligned with this general agenda of money making on certain subject called CO2, and we know that for many people, as one of the speakers says, all this talk about green energy and green agenda is only green for the pockets of certain individuals, making their wallets greener, but not actually helping with ecology, not actually helping with anything else. And those scientists who are trying to present the facts that can be a little bit outside of the agenda or hurt somebody's profit, they're just being silenced. Their apps being deleted from the app stores, their accounts being deleted. And I know that Gregory was recently facing that with his LinkedIn account. So could you tell us a little bit more about this and where are we going with this path, actually?
Well, I'm currently executive director for the CO2 Coalition, and Arthur just referenced Dr. Will Happer of Princeton, emeritus professor there, being silenced. So I'll be talking with Will Happer later today, talk with him on a daily basis. And we at the CO2 Coalition are kind of I like to think of us as the tip of the spear presenting the science that disputes this notion of man-made catastrophic warming. A number of people demanding that Facebook remove our Facebook page. My scientific app, Inconvenient Facts, we rolled it out. We had over 20,000 downloads in 24 hours, and Apple removed it from the App Store. They said that it lacked compelling content. Well, if it's free to download. You can download it with 60 of the top inconvenient facts. It's back up now and available. I was recently banned permanently from the social media platform LinkedIn back in August. Again, I'm a scientist. I was accepted as an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this background, and I post scientific information. In August, LinkedIn started removing almost every time I would post something factual and scientific, they would remove it immediately and call it false and misleading. In September, my very last post on LinkedIn, I said, I think I'm about to be banned and deplatformed. That post was removed. It was called false and misleading. And then they banned and deplatformed me, which is, it's kind of funny. You don't know whether to laugh or cry, but so I'm banned permanently for posting factual data. So no, I've experienced it, and so have we at the CO2 Coalition. And in the chat here, you can click on the link to see, go to our website. We have a huge amount of factual data there that you can access. Thank you.
So this honest scientist, highly qualified, accepted by the IPCC as a reviewer of scientific papers, but because Jim Dale has not heard of him, he assumes nobody has heard of him. Last week he called him as coming from a cave. This is the ignorance of Jim Dale. You couldn't have a more highly qualified person. Yet Jim Dale has, I believe, slandered him. He slandered him because he's called him a person that spreads lies, and he hasn't. And I'm now going to take this matter up because I will be demanding an apology from Jim Dale. And we'll see what GB News do about this matter, because I think it's a very serious matter. What Jim Dale is now doing is going for personal attacks on people rather than actually deal with the subject. And of course, this wasn't even the subject this week. The subject was the droughts and the data I just presented on droughts. which is what he promised to respond to last week. The previous week, Jim had this to say about this gentleman.
Well,
Who is Gregory Whitestone?
Who is this guy who lives in a cave somewhere and writes this?
No,
and
you see, all you do is you don't argue the evidence ever.
I'm arguing the evidence.
No, you're not. You're not arguing the evidence.
Okay.
I've put evidence on.
Equally.
But not content with burying himself with that particular person, a great unknown living in a cave, Jim carries himself on this week with this.
You also picked a guy called Richard Feynman, who died in 1988, even before climate change was a narrative. You're kind of clutching at straws.
This is the graph that Jim Dale's referring to. And what the graph is all the climate alarmist observations on the red line there's an average, and the real data measured by NASA satellites in the green. And actually, the red line is 4 times the slope of the green line. In other words, warming 4 times faster than the NASA observations by satellite. So at the bottom of that, because this doesn't agree, the models don't agree with the actual observations, I included a very famous quote from a very famous Nobel Prize-winning scientist called Richard Feynman. He has done a number of quotes. The quote is not about climate change, it's about what science is. And it reads, "If it is a scientific hypothesis that disagrees with experiment, it's wrong." In other words, any experiment, anything you do, any theory, no matter how smart you are, he says, if it doesn't agree with the observations, it's wrong. So it was a quote about what science is. But Jim Dale has now, in effect, made the assumption that this paper here, which is a John Christie paper, and he is the man who developed the system for NASA on measuring the satellites, measuring the temperature by satellite. This ignorance, this blind ignorance by Jim Dale, it's just shattering. But he thinks he did it. And so, therefore, and he did die in 1988, and he died as a very, very famous man. But it doesn't affect Jim Dale. So now, he's just he doesn't know enough to know the basic scientific process. That's what we're into here. But we'll carry on. Of course, Jim Dale also attacked me, so he managed, 3 good, pretty goes there at people, rather than deal with the evidence, rather than deal with what I put forward, and he attacked me. I've got nothing to worry about at all on this issue. It's just ignorant, that's all. Absolutely ignorant. The truth is, in climate change, there's no such thing really as a climate scientist. I don't like the term, because there's no such thing, because each person is specialising in one area or the other. Now, my particular background was hydroclimatology, so I'm looking at the total amount of lack and increase in water is the most important thing, but to do that I have to look at the whole atmosphere. So I come to it from the hydrological aspect. So hydrology, of course, is a big part of what I am. And other people do it from geology and come that way, and other people do it from physics and come that way. Other people do it from statistics and come that way. So there's no such thing as a pure climate scientist in that way. But when I was called that, I accept it. It's okay, because it makes sense to the general public. That's all. And all he's doing is ignorance. And by the way, I recently discovered the sort of training that goes on with Extinction Rebellion and Stop Oil, the training they have to do to how to debate. And they do all the dirty tricks in the world, and he's certainly doing them very well. But he's just wasting time doing this, and he's not dealing with the subject. And so each time we use up the valuable minutes we've got on rubbish like this. And that's part of his technique. You can imagine how I felt sitting there listening to all this when I could chop him up into little bits, but I'm not allowed the time to do it. It's just incredibly frustrating. Anyway, we'll carry on now. I do defend myself on air, of course, but we'll carry on now.
And can I say, because you've put your video up, I've got two easy nice, easy graphics that you can put up. So there's the first one. That's 2,000 years of temperature.
So for the record, this is another way of representing the famous or the infamous hockey stick, which does away with the Roman warm period, does away with the medieval warm period, and gradually cooling, until suddenly man came along. I have totally debunked this, as have many leading scientists, and there's a video on it. I'll put it in the description. This is expressing the hockey stick here, just another way. It just does away with history, and I've obviously dealt with it in many videos, so I don't accept it. But more importantly, it's got nothing to do with the subject we're discussing. The IPCC report I started this with and did last week, they reacted to, did say there is more warming. I didn't take that one on because I knew it was going to be complicated to explain. I just dealt with all the different terrible things, the catastrophes happening with weather around the world caused by climate change. That's what I'm dealing with. But he just brings up any old chart. Previously, by the way, he brought up a chart that he couldn't even explain himself. So I don't accept this, just for the record.
And at the very, very right-hand side end there, you can see the reds, which come in terms of, this is global average temperatures right across the globe. So right at the very end, you can see what's happened. So it's been fairly static, colder for a time, and then all of a sudden, bang, particularly in this last decade or so.
So on this basis, of course, this gradual cooling over 2,000 years, no warm periods at all, just getting colder and colder and colder. And man came along and warmed things up. So had they had their way, they'd have just carried on getting colder and getting colder. You know, we'd have had frozen Thames, frozen Rhines, the whole lot. I mean, this is so absurd. Actually, it's the basis of the alarmism, though. Interesting. Anyway, we'll carry on now.
There's a second one. Hopefully will come up. And there we are. That's the record of the last 150 years or so, 170 years. And you can see quite obviously what's going on in terms of global temperatures, and right through the middle of that you've got your CO2
What are you saying?
graph.
Yeah, well, you said we can see quite clearly
well,
what is happening.
I think you can see the blues mean under the average, the reds mean over the average. Over time, the peak at the right-hand side is where we are now, and underlying all of that is the CO2 level, which is the black line going through the middle.
So
Your
slide
a child.
saying,
Yeah.
Well, it's just
This is from of course. This is from NOAA. So you know that's NOAA in the United States.
That's the climate. That's Met Office for you.
That's the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration in the United States.
It's interesting that Jim has actually rejected some of the previous NOAA graphs I have presented on the show, called them spurious. Never mind. Here. This graph is a well-known graph. I'm familiar with it, of course, and I know it is totally false. I have done a video on that, and I'm going to link it in the description below this video, and it describes how they've altered the historic temperatures. And for the record, I don't even accept that CO2 line they've got on that graph. You know, they've got quite a lot of CO2 contribution way back in 1850, when one little country, the UK, had just invented the Industrial Revolution, and it couldn't have had any effect really at all on the CO2 levels worldwide.
OK, so look. OK, so you come back at him with that.
Well, first of all, you do an ad hominem attack on me. Right? I build climate models of the atmosphere and looking forward to droughts, looking forward to floods, and having to plan them in the real world. So I built mathematical models of the atmosphere. I've been in charge of a whole country for monitoring climate, etc. And I've got a master's in it. And I didn't choose to go into academia. So just doing personal attacks. I know you're not trained to do that. No, let me finish. I know you're not trained to do that, but it doesn't get us anywhere. Now, what you've just brought up is irrelevant. You promised me last week you would show me how the droughts are increasing. I didn't bring up any of those subjects you just brought up. I brought up the IPCC. I brought up UK droughts. I brought up the Met Office here, stating very clearly, you know,
your drought graph, Paul, went from 1982 to 2012.
Listen,
you forgot to mention the last 12 or so years.
Please let me finish.
Jim Dale is so ignorant about how science works. Papers are produced, like this particular graph he was talking about last week. Papers are produced at different times. Now, if you produce a paper showing a reduction in droughts, you don't keep on doing the same work. You know, and other people do it. So what I present is a range of subjects. And I presented today in that video a range of papers showing that all these different authorities, which are the Environment Agency UK, the environment equivalent called the EPA in America, the Met Office and the other agencies that I dealt with all agree that there is no evidence for increasing droughts. In fact, of course, I have presented some evidence for decreasing droughts, including a global one I ended with on that, which goes right up to date. So just because one of the papers is a certain range, and the second point here, of course, is that 12 years is irrelevant. I would argue that 15 years or 20 years of my graph can be irrelevant. He can argue that's too short a section, but you've got to give some indication the other way. So I even used NASA to show there'd been no droughts, none. Where have they disappeared for 17 years? So he's just totally ignorant, not just about the subject, because he doesn't understand even what climate is, but he's ignorant as regards the scientific process in its completeness. He doesn't know enough to know what he doesn't know.
And you can check it afterwards. This is from the current Met Office in the UK. Currently, there are no UK climate attribution studies available that clearly link human-induced climate change with an altered risk of drought in events. There's the link. It's on there today in the Met Office. I've quoted the Environment Agency here. No, let me finish.
I've quoted. You've got 5 seconds, and I've got to.
I suggest people go to the Met Office site, look at climate change, look at what it says. You may well find a little bit of that in there, but what you do is that you extrapolate small parts of it.
No.
Clutching at straws. Met Office are very, very clear about climate change.
Listen, the point is that he's given you something from the Met Office. He said it's come from today. People can check it out.
Correct.
He's not allowed to make stuff up. Sorry, I'm speaking. He's not going to make stuff up, and then we won't let him, just like with your slides. We'll also check yours. He has made a very valid point there, Jim Dale. Right, well, listen. Stay with me, of course. That's meteorologist and social commentator Jim Dale, and also climate scientist Paul Burgess.
So there we are. That was that programme, a very few minutes, no time to properly respond and chop him up as I wanted to. And I really got to change my tack, I think, somehow, because no matter what I present him with, he just denies it. I can present him, I think if God came down and gave him an instruction, he wouldn't believe it because he doesn't want to. And that's how the Extinction Rebellion and Stop Oil people are trained. He's appearing continually. The night before that, I think he was on the newspapers review, reviewing the papers as a personality, as it were. So he is an extremist, and he is an extremist. He wants to stop fossil oil completely and so on, and he's very left-wing. So if he wants to do those things, he gets all the airtime he can get, and he criticises really good people who get taken off. They used to get taken off Twitter. Facebook was very prone to it, and everyone knows about it, the censorship. So they use the very censorship to sort of defame people and smear people that they're introducing. Because you know why? They can't take free speech. They can't take proper attacks. They can't take people with knowledge like myself having a go at them. And I've got to keep this going, even though it's tiring me out doing the 600 miles for a few minutes. I've got to keep it going because I've got a toehold, and I need to expand that toehold. And I've got to figure out a way of just completely, exposing them for what they are. You see, there is a whole science base that's different to what they're saying. The IPCC is not a scientific body, it's a government political body that takes and spins science. And that's what the newspapers do. That's what the BBC does, it's what Sky does, it's what Channel 4 does, and ITV does. That I would never get onto those channels because they are biased, completely biased, and they're just doing propaganda. They are propagandists. I'm not. And I'm more than willing to debate anybody, anywhere as it were. But let's see how we go in the future and how I can try to get round this blank denial, this total ignorance, which takes your breath away, but it wastes the time on air. Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening to this one. I hope you can carry on with me on this campaign. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.